Right. So, welcome everyone. We are talking today about an important threshold in the Byzantine history. And this threshold is connected with the end of the Macedonian dynasty, the longest dynasty in the history of the Eastern Roman Empire. So it started, I don't want to say that it was the beginning of the end, but it was something important in the sense of what happened in 400-year time. So now it's the end of the glory of Byzantium as it was known, and Basil II comparable to Emperor Justinian in many senses. Actually, this is like a good research topic to make comparison between the two and to identify the differences and similarities between the two. Under Basil II, the Byzantine army took Antioch that was already not in the Byzantine hands for 300 years, more than 300 years. Jerusalem, right, there is also was, Jerusalem was taking. And this stabilization and growth were connected with two consequent reigns of the two productive emperors, John Simsky and Basil II. At the same time, Basil II reign was also the longest reign in the whole history of the Eastern Roman Empire. But be this as it may, Basil didn't do anything to secure succession. And every successful company, every successful operation is judged by the fact how this operation depends or not depends on personal factor. If somebody would die, so it would still operate smoothly. That means it's a good system. So that's something that was to be challenged, what to be tested during this time, because Basil, he was celibate, or at least we don't worry about any kids. He never was married. At the same time, he kind of was a workaholic type, I guess. And he never really he didn't take care of succession to the empire, and that paid it paid price, right? So it actually backfired right after his death, because we are not seeing stone rock figures after him for a while. So, and that's how he might be comparable to Emperor Justinian, because even I would say maybe Basil was more successful in the sense that he left the empire with full coffers. The Byzantine numisma was a pure gold thing, right? And it was very attractive currency for whoever dealt with money. So, as you remember, John Simsky, he promised to marry Feofana, but it didn't work out. Okay, so Simsky was the one who dealt with Sviatoslav's invasion, and Sviatoslav was no less than father to Holy Prince Vladimir, right? And Olga, who baptized in 957, was Holy Prince Vladimir's grandmother. Okay.
Father, I have a quick question.
Yes.
I thought Theophano was like she had like a really bad reputation, like not for plotting against her husband, but just like being a bit loose. Was that the reason? Wasn't that also the reason why they like that she couldn't get married?
Right. She was called. I mean, there is some reference to her as a harlot empress. Right. Yeah. I mean, I think to some extent because the both of them were reported in plotting against Nicephorus. So kind of that was the part. I'm not sure. I mean, it was connected that's her reputation, but also the fact that the both of them, they plotted against her husband. Right. That was a big part of this moral dimension. Okay. So you will see Byzantine possessions in Italy on a map very in a few minutes. After the fragmentation of the Sassanid Caliphate, there was Fatimid Caliphate in Egypt that was strong and an enemy. But Arabs continued to suffer defeats. Okay. And Basil II, he inherited, he was able to surf on the wave very successfully, to use all this memento, to seize this memento, okay? And that was done, arguably, cannot be done better, right? So the army became fully professional. There were also new combat skills that you looked at yesterday regarding cataphracts. And it's always important when we speak about economical decline, when we speak about military defeats, military setbacks, to understand what kind of weaponry was used at this time, what kind of military tactics they used, because it's all part of the answer. Why did they lose, or why did they do well on the battlefield? Okay, so he is kind of very direct. He's a direct offshoot of the Macedonian dynasty, Basil, very much connected with it in all ways. So not an upstart or anything, right? He dealt with also powerful families of Bardas Claras and Bardas Phocas. And those families, as you realize, they represented this dynamics: Constantinople versus provinces, Constantinople versus thematic structure, where military governors maintain a lot of power in their hands, right? And then they can threaten the capital, right? So that sort of dynamics that is seen here. So he didn't have enough resources, and then he summoned up external aid, and this external aid was from Holy Prince Vladimir. I'm not sure if every one of you saw that recent Russian blockbuster Viking. Okay, so let's see a short thing from here, from this. Okay.
Ты о чем думаешь-то? Пока послы Ромею здесь, слышь? Печенеги несутся. Ромеи самые сильные. Возьми все, что дадут, но им не верь. Ты всегда для них будешь чужим.
Брат. Договорился с Ромеями, печенеги не трогали его много лет.
Договорился. Они наняли твоего отца. А когда он ослушался, слышь, они убили его руками печенегов.
Надо перестать бояться. Бояться того, что нападут печенеги. Ночь придет, день наступит. Мне нужна сила Ромеев.
Эти сундуки с дарами и леопарда император дарит Архонту.
Εδώ ο Βασίλειος ο Δεύτερος ο Πορφυρογέννητος
Багрянародный Василий,
και ο συναυτοκράτορας του
его
Κωνσταντίνος ο
соправитель
Όγδος
Багрянародный
και η
Константин,
Άννη Πορφυρογέννητη,
Багрянародная
η
Анна,
αδερφή του.
их сестра.
Дар Бога.
Τι,
Дар Бога.
Λεότητον Ανна, συμβαίνει χάρη του Θεού.
το δώρο του Θεού, Ο Αυτοκράτορ προτείνει δόξα
Император предлагает славу
σε σένα και στους
тебе и
στρατιώτες σου.
твоим воинам.
Εάν πολιορκήσεις
Если
τη
ты
Χερσόνησο,
осадишь для него
στην
Корсунь,
αυτοκρατορία μένεται εξέγερση και η
империи
Χερσόνησος
мятеж,
είναι με το μέρος των
город Корсунь
εξεγερθέντων.
на стороне восставших.
Το βραβείο του Αυτοκράτορα για τη βοήθεια θα είναι...
Награда императора за помощь будет
Ο
щедрой.
πρέσβης επιθυμεί να γνωρίσει την απάντηση του Άρχοντα.
Посол хочет знать ответ Архонта.
Я помогу, но не за золото.
Ο Αυτοκράτορ θα σε πληρώσει με χρυσό για αυτούς.
Что имеет в виду
Τι
Архонт?
άλλο θέλει ο Άρχοντας?
Что он хочет?
Дар Бога.
Το δώρο του Θεού?
Ты сказал дар от Бога?
Анну.
Αυτό είναι αδύνατο.
Это невозможно.
Θέλω να ξέρω τι έχει
Ты
αποφασίσει.
должен забыть о ней.
Ο Άρχοντας δεν μπορεί να πάρει για γυναίκα την Πορφυρογέννητη.
Архонт не может получить в жены багрянародную Анну. Отказали даже германскому императору.
Ο Άρχοντας μπορεί να ζητήσει από τον Αυτοκράτορα οτιδήποτε εκτός από την Άννα.
Архонт
Ας του
может
πει, τι
просить
άλλο
у
θέλει.
императора все, кроме Анны. Скажи, что ты хочешь.
Ее хочу. В жены.
Автосипе Анна.
Okay.
Ocha, the book said that they offered Anna to Prince Vladimir and he accepted after he got baptized, not that he demanded her and then.
Well, my understanding is closer to what you just saw, that actually to offer Anna, which will be quite unthinkable indeed, right? To somebody who wasn't even, and when they didn't go on their promise, right? Because then he put Chersonesus under the siege. Anyway, so if there is, I haven't studied this in depth, but this is sort of, I think, this conventional understanding of this. Okay. So the conventional date of baptism is 1988, but it's possible that it was in 1989. And thus, Russia became part of the Byzantine Commonwealth and remains very much strongly influenced until today by Byzantine political philosophy, by Byzantine orthodoxy, and art, I guess, also. So our attire is connected also with the Byzantine one, but it's all church that I mentioned, church influence. So Basil II succeeded in Bulgaria, but we should always understand that, as it was seen clearly with Justinian, that victories can be counterproductive. Or perhaps another way to look at this, there is nothing perfect in this world, in our world where we live. So by taking over Bulgaria, Basil got rid of the buffer state, because Bulgarians were a perfect buffer state between the steppe men, between people of the steppes, and the Romans. So now the Romans, the Byzantines, happen to have the common border with the Pechenegs, which was delineated by the river of Danube. So this battle of Claydon, which is otherwise known as the mountain Belasica, okay, is an interesting thing, because the Bulgarians were very inventive and came up with the idea of palisades. You will see those palisades in a minute or seconds. So let me just do new share with you.
Ocha, this is probably not that important, but the book
then keep it out of here right now, please. Okay. a movable fence, palisade. So, Evgraf, what did you have to ask?
The book said that 1 out of every 100 was blinded, but your PowerPoint says 1 of 10.
Yeah.
I'm just wondering because
well, oh, sorry.
I checked online and it was 1 out of 100. So
The history of the Byzantine Empire is often overshadowed by the Western Roman Empire. Yet among the small but illustrious order...
Right.
It said that like 99 people would be blinded, and then there would be 1 left with 1 eye to lead the rest.
Right. If you think about practically, right, what efforts would it take to gouge eyes from thousands of people? It's probably a lot of efforts, right? So my suggestion to seize it, to approach it, there were many, it was a huge unscaled by modern standard, huge unscaled war crime committed against Bulgarians, because by modern standards, it's just totally incomprehensible to do something like that. This is definitely a war crime instance. But just to take eyes from thousands of people would take a lot of effort. So I would just suggest to see this as a sort of, as it was mentioned in this brief video, as a gift, as a message to Bulgarian king, and many prisoners of war were sent home like that. But I mean, practically takes eye from 1,000 for, let's say, 10,000 of people. That would be a huge, how to say, it would take a lot of efforts from the Byzantines to do it practically.
It's Andrei.
Yes.
So this one article I found was talking about how some historians theorize that this savagery was committed because Basil II lost his favorite commander,
I don't know.
and he was like enraged, and he was like blinded with rage within, so he decided to like literally blind
I
his.
cannot comment on this. I never heard this. Uh, I hope it is not the case. I hope it's just speculation. So, I mean, it kind of doesn't really represent him very well, if sort of. So, but I think it was a well calculated, terrifying message, you know. So if you come back, what would happen to you? So kind of go home, and whoever would come across with you and would see your blind eyes would know where you lost them, and his children would know basically where this man lost his eyes, and they will be constantly terrified, and wouldn't think again going and mess with Romans. That I think was the message. But again, that I think I don't really, I'm not sure if everyone actually is able to prove one point or another. Okay, so now Basil became also became part of the Bulgarian problems, because once you take over a country, you're now responsible for whatever happens there. Okay, and now Basil also implemented what he did with Russians. Bulgarians was offered to be absorbed in the Byzantine Commonwealth. They were sent over to the Armenian borders. Byzantines were masters of what Stalin did in the 20th century a number of times, moving people around, sending Tartars from Crimea to Kazakhstan, sending Germans to Kazakhstan, sending Chechens there. That was 20th century story. And the Byzantines did it all the time, sending Bulgarians to Armenian border. So Bulgarians were welcome to become part of the Byzantine aristocracy, as long as they belong, as long as they are part of the melting pot, as long as they are ready to become born again Byzantines. Okay, so church lost its independence, precisely what Tsar Boris afraid of when he became an Orthodox Christian. But at the same time, Basil, that's why I'm saying that I don't want to see him as somebody who was governed by his patience, reactions, and so, because with Bulgarians, he also didn't want to push too much. He didn't, yes, he sent a message home, but at the same time, now it's time, the war is over, we are making a peace treaty with you, and we're starting to restore the countries. Your humiliation is not going to last forever. That's, I think, it's very admirable, very admirable. So that's something I talked about, right? That he had a niece, right? That his niece Zoe, she was married to the future Roman the Sword. So then she married the future Michael the Fourth, the emperor, right? And Michael the Fourth, he suffered from epilepsy, which wasn't really something that wasn't people treated epileptic seizures as a bad thing, as something that it happened to you. Why did it happen to you? What did you do wrong? Why do you have it? So that sort of was attitude toward seizures, and they even built a special. They even built a special sort of curtains, right? When somehow he probably normally, I think people they know when a seizure would happen to them. So, you know, like Dostoevsky, he was very, how to say, first-hand experience in Brother Karamazov's about writing about epilepsy. But so I think people usually know when it comes, but somehow it happened even in the presence of foreign diplomats, which was very embarrassing. So they built this kind of thing with curtains that whenever a seizure would happen, they would close it so that he would have some privacy. It wouldn't be that embarrassed for everyone. So, right.
What was the name of him again? Who had the seizures?
Michael the Fourth.
Michael the Fourth.
So Zoe, Basil's niece, she was married for 3 times, and her last husband was Constantine the Ninth Monomachos, right? And he was, unlike Basil II, Constantine the Ninth, he was a civilian. And we deal now with reports. You see that's why nothing is perfect. Reports say that he disbanded troops on the Armenian border in order to turn peasants into taxpayers, because by disbanding them, and he spent it a lot. Constantine the Ninth, his construction program was on the scale of Justinian's. He had one monastery that he wanted to decorate and wanted to build new things, and he changed his mind about design, so prices would go sky high, and he used those state money to pay for his constructions. And then he is accused of disbanding those troops on the border with Armenia. And now, guys, there are new kids on the block, and those kids, they meant business. Okay, they were no-nonsense kids, and they were Seljuks, who already took over Iran, and now they started to have common border with Byzantium. And those army was disbanded exactly there. But then other historians would come up and say, listen up, we don't know about those troops. Maybe they were useless. Maybe they barely exist. You cannot really blame him for doing this. It's very easy, to sell it out and say it's ABC. He disbanded those troops, and and the Seljuks crossed, and now we know the rest of the history. Well, I just would like to expose you to this uncertainty that historians work with. So don't buy in certainty, don't buy in ready story, something that really explains everything very linear, very, very, very easy. So because it's all based on sources, and sources very often very ambiguous. You can read them this way, you can read them another way, but we don't necessarily have the full information. So maybe those army didn't really exist. Maybe he decided to use more advanced type of the army, professional army, instead of having those peasants employed there. So, but be this as it may, he was a civilian without ever being at the battlefield, Constantine the 11th. So now I'm not sure. I think can we afford it? To look about Magyars? I think we can. I think it's a good thing to look about the last European nation, arrival of the last European nation. Okay, so. So do you see now this? Do you see this YouTube? Yes.
Sometimes you need to get away from the kids for
Yes, we
grown-up
see
time.
it.
or get away from the grown-ups for kid time. Get away from home, together. Vacation's not far away. Book the home that makes the vacation.
You see this history.
The 9th
time
century
now, right?
AD was a brutal time for Europeans.
Ah,
It was a time of transition between the formative period of the early Middle Ages and the rise of the modern nation-states that we know today. Raids, incursions, and full-scale invasions from people on the peripheries of Europe were a mainstay throughout this time. From the fjords and valleys of the far north, Scandinavian Viking raiders harried coastlines and plundered monasteries almost at will. From the south, Arab and Berber war parties crossed over the waterways from northern Africa to enslave Mediterranean islanders and form independent Muslim enclaves. From the east, however, came arguably the most terrifying invasion of all. A vast and unheard of new wave of nomadic steppe warriors that came thundering onto the plains of Eastern Europe, bringing death in their wake. Like the Huns before them, these highly skilled horse warriors had likely originated in the vast and wild steppe lands of Central Asia, as they raided and pillaged territories as far afield as modern-day Greece, Italy, Germany, France and Spain. Their sudden appearance struck terror into the hearts of every nation of Europe. By the end of the 9th century, under the leadership of their Grand Prince Arpad, they had claimed their new territorial homeland upon the Hungarian plain, which would eventually become one of the modern-day nation-states we know today. To the horror of the other established European powers of the day, the Magyars had arrived. By the 9th century, Europe had long suffered barbarian incursions of nomadic horsemen from the wild and desolate steppe lands to the east. First came the Scythians and the Sarmatians during ancient times. Later, after the fall of the Western Roman Empire, came Huns, Avars and Alans, to name a few. The culture, customs and languages of these people shifted and changed over the years as they came into contact with other groups. Yet as long as they remained in the vast expanse of windswept plains that made up Central Asia, one facet of life united them all: horses. Steppe nomads lived in their saddles. They ate horse meat when they needed to, they drank their horse's milk, and they used every part of a horse when it died. Always expert archers, and often adept swordsmen too, warbands of these hardened steppe warriors, who were veterans simply because of the lifestyles that they lived, were a terrifying prospect for the armies of the sedentary towns and cities of Europe, who generally had no such innate ability and affinity with their battlefield equipment. When the Magyars first began to appear in the historical record from around 800 onwards, they generally seem to have operated as mercenaries in the armies of other warlike coalitions, such as that of Khan Krum of Bulgaria against the Eastern Roman Byzantines in 811. Islamic sources later talk of Magyars raiding and taking Slavic captives to sell to the Byzantines at Constantinople. Later still, they worked for, and at other times warred against, the powerful semi-nomadic Khazar Khaganate based in the Crimea and the northern Caucasus. It's during the 860s, however, the contingents of Magyars seem to have begun launching raids far to the west, deep into East Francia in modern-day Germany. These raids would continue with ever-increasing ferocity and scope for more than a century to come. In 881, a force of Magyars again invaded East Francia and fought 2 successive battles against the local levies raised against them. In 893, yet another Magyar army was transported across the Danube by a Byzantine fleet and unleashed upon their longtime enemy, the Bulgarians, defeating them in 3 consecutive battles. In 894, they invaded Pannonia, and possibly in response, the Bulgarians hired another nomadic confederation, the Pechenegs, to invade the Magyars' territories in the Pontic steppe region to the north of the Black Sea. As a result of this invasion of their own territories, in 896, probably now under the overlordship of Grand Prince Arpad, the vast majority of the Magyar people crossed over the Carpathian Mountains to enter what would eventually become their new homeland, the plains of modern-day Hungary, a wide open area of grasslands, perfect as grazing land for their horses. It's from this new base of power that they would go on to launch invasion after invasion into Eastern and Western Europe for generations to come. Some of these were simply opportunistic raids. Others, however, were fought for genuine defensive reasons, in order to cling on to their new homeland. Numerous conflicting accounts exist on the life of Arpad, making a concrete analysis of his life difficult to come by. Nevertheless, it seems likely that he was born in around 845, during a time when his people were already working as mercenaries and launching military expeditions throughout Eastern Europe. It seems likely that he was the son of Almas, who was named as the first head of the Hungarian Confederation by nearly all Hungarian sources, although this claim is disputed by the Byzantine Emperor Constantine VII, who claims that the Hungarians never had a prince before Arpad. He argues that it was the Khazar Khagan who centralized the Hungarian.
So, okay. Right. So it's important also to remember about Magyars, about Hungarians, right? So at the time of Basil II, Constantinople reached very high numbers in the sense of population. So by very optimistic calculations, 500,000. As I mentioned, Byzantine started to have the common border with the Pechenegs. And that meant whenever something would go off script, something would go wrong with the Pechenegs, they would pour over an empire. And that's precisely what happened. During the winter time, they were able to cross Danube. And then another thing, right? When you are weak and you rely for outsiders' help to sort your problems out, you very often may end up at the mercy of this person, whoever did you a favor. And in this case, it was witnessed twice around this time that earlier a Byzantine governor of Italy relied on Normans' help to suppress a rebellion. So Normans became, since then, a constant headache for the Byzantines until finally Normans captured in around 1087 Bari. But then Normans did a very good thing that we celebrate every year in May. They robbed St. Nicholas relics from the town of Myra and brought it to their stronghold of Bari that was just around 20 years, 30 years before taking from the Romans. And this basilica where St. Nicholas relics are a very vivid example of Normans architecture. It was built by Normans. Every year, this day is celebrated when Normans shoot for one of the most popular saints in the history, took over forcefully his relics from Bari and from Myra and moved to Bari. And then Russians celebrate this and Greeks don't celebrate. And then since Roman Catholics demoted our fathers and Nicholas, it's only celebrated in Bari on a wide scale. So again, another example of how history works, right? So it's not really like black and white here. So same time with relying on outsiders' help was similar with Pechenegs. So Pechenegs were allowed to settle in the empire after Basil II, and they also became a problem. So they kind of, once you let them in, they would never go out. That's also you should be aware of this. Okay, so now take a look at Italy around the 11th century. So take a look at this. You see So Sicily was lost. Sicily was lost earlier and became an emirate, Muslim territory that Byzantines actually they regained, right? And what else? What else is here to think about? Yeah, I think that gives you an idea about local geography. That's also important. Right, so somehow Zoe was loved, and her husband Michael the Fourth, and his castrated brother John, who was in charge of regent of orphanage. That was his title. Read or Orphanotrophos. He wasn't that loved, so when they wanted to after Michael the Fourth's death, to pronounce an emperor their nephew. Basically, his nephew ended up in a regular condition, being gouged. I think he was blinded and castrated, so he was Michael the Fifth only for a very short time. So, and here is Zoe with her final husband, Constantine the Ninth from Hagia Sophia. Okay. So again, also how critically chronicle should be approached is seen with Constantine the Ninth, that it was mentioned that he used state money for his various mistresses, but then I don't know, can you spend the whole American budget for mistress? Probably not. So therefore, to what extent exactly you can, how much money do you need to spend with mistress, right? Okay, so can you spend all state money? Is this possible? So therefore, all those things they have to be taken with a grain of salt. Okay, so right, and now his currency started during his time. Numisma only contained 87%, and only was 18 carats instead of 24. And this is very bad thing, because once people learn about this, they lose trust to you right away. So it's a very bad thing to play with, to toy with things like that, because you really undermine one of the cornerstone things like currency, because currency represents stability. And nevertheless, I don't know if it can be true that it's available on eBay for $1,300, but that's how, at least that's how his nomism is supposed to look. Okay, so right. So do remember those challenges that I mentioned to you, right? That Normans, Pechenegs, and most importantly Seljuk Turks. Okay, so and when and constant the empire didn't have any invasion from 1018 roughly until 1055. The empire enjoyed very peaceful time, right? Very peaceful time. So, but they didn't know what was behind the corner. And I mentioned to you once that one way to learn history, Byzantine history, to pay attention to the battles. And the battle of at Yarmouk in 636 became a very important marker of the Islamic invasion. Now Seljuk's time is coming up. Okay, so there's going to be Battle of Manzikert in 1074 that was of the similar significance. Okay, thank you very much for your participation.